and just, being convicted about something in our lives that we can do better, ways that we can help others more. In your name, amen.
Amen.
All right, so we are recording. Got it. Okay, everybody can see the screen all right? All right, we're going to get started. And for those of you who are new to this, we are looking at technically the 7 churches of Revelation. I need to fix that. So I've given this presentation a few different times, and I feel like I call it something different every single time. But so now I'm calling it the 7 churches, and we're looking at the 7 different churches, and we are right smack dab in the middle. In number 4, the city of Thyatira, sometimes called Thyatira. You'll hear it pronounced both ways because, again, remember, all of those ancient titles that were Greek back then, they get transliterated in different ways and pronounced in different ways. So I'm not fussy about it. I don't care which way you pronounce it, but we're just going to learn about it today. And so what we usually do is we start out by traveling to the city itself, traveling back in time and traveling across the ocean to what is today modern day Turkey. And today in Turkey, the city is called Akhisar. So that is where we're going to first. And it's a pretty nifty city. I like it a lot. It's not the fanciest of the ones. And I think what's really interesting is that of all the 7 letters that we get, it's the longest to the church that we probably know the least about, and that some people think is probably the least important. So just interesting that it gets the longest letter. And as we've talked about before, if John is over here on the island of Patmos, then it makes sense that he would have sent his letter by boat. They would dock over here at the harbor in Ephesus. And so this is probably the reason for the order of the different churches. They'd get the letter first. They'd have some people who'd copy it, share it. Then they would send it on to the next church. So just walking up the road here to Smyrna, and then from Smyrna, they would walk on up to Pergamum. That's where we were last week. And then they would walk over here to Thyatira. If you guys remember, we were talking about Ephesus and Smyrna both being harbor cities. But last week we moved inland to Pergamum, which was that beautiful clifftop acropolis, if you remember the pictures. And this is kind of its sister city, if you will. They have a lot of connections between the two, and they are both inland cities. Thyatira is very different from Pergamum in the sense that, and I thought this topographical map would help you understand. Remember, Pergamum's on the top of an acropolis. Thyatira, if you look at it, it's smack dab in the green. So it's actually in the valley between these 2 different mountain ranges. So unlike a lot of the other cities that have beautiful acropoli, it is flat. I mean, really flat. And what that meant was that it got taken over a lot. So the city was actually destroyed many different times. And we believe that it was first founded by the Lydians. And so it was part of the Lydian kingdom. This is back in the 6th century. So if you remember your Old Testament history, when the Israelites are taken into the Babylonian exile, this is about the same time that the kingdom of Lydia existed. So that's about the same time this city is being founded. As I said, it gets destroyed a lot. And so it's refounded later on under the Greeks. So remember, we've talked about Alexander the Great. Here's a picture of him on his horse. We talked about him a lot. He helped refound several of these cities, and technically it was a lot of his generals who were put in charge of refounding them. And this is one of his generals. Remember, after he dies, his empire is broken up into like 4 different bits, and one bit is taken by this guy, Seleucus the First Nicator. And you probably recognize that Nicator because we talked a lot about that word Nike. Remember, Nike, just do it, victory. So he's got this epitaph, if you will, of being the victor. So Seleucus the First, he's the victor. And I love this coin of the guy, because if you look at this, he's got kind of a diadem, the crown on his head. But if you look at it, he's got like these bull antlers sticking out. Like, I mean, how bad is that? Like, the guy's got bull, horns sticking out of his crown. So, I mean, he's really looking like he's seriously bad. So this is Seleucus's portrait on the front. And you may have heard of the Seleucid dynasty, the Seleucid Empire. This is the guy that's founding it. And so he helps to refound the city of Thyatira, and they put a garrison there of troops. So they put a garrison there of troops, because Thyatira is supposed to protect Pergamum. And it gets the title of being the gateway to Pergamum because that's the way that the armies, if they're moving inland, from the inland towards the sea, they'd hit Thyatira first. And so the whole point of the city was to just stall for time. So if they can hold this invading empire off long enough, then they can get the message to Pergamum and they can get the people, over there prepared. Everybody's up in the Acropolis, they can close out the walls of the city. So that was their whole purpose. And again, one of the reasons why they get destroyed a lot, because they were just there to help Pergamum. So Thyatira has a vivid memory of the garrisons that were there and the military presence that they had there. Now, once it becomes part of the Roman Empire, awesome for them, along with all of these other cities of Asia Minor, because if you remember, the Roman Empire, it's got really, really vast holdings. And so they're no longer on the frontier. They're not having all of these other empires come in to take them over, so that they're not having to be the garrison and to protect Pergamum, because they're right smack dab in the middle of the Roman Empire. They're not on the borders anymore. So what was kind of a really not so great thing for them, being flat and easy to flatten by an invading army, became something wonderful, because now, since they're not in this cliff top area, it's got this very open, cosmopolitan feel to it. If you look, it's in the middle of a few roads that are being connected, and you can see it's kind of in the middle of several of the different cities that were written to in Revelation. And so it's kind of a crossroads, if you will. So it becomes a major center of trade later on. Lots of commercial deals were going through here. The last time I was in Thyatira was last August. And so this is exciting. So Kathleen, you won't have seen this, because they've just started excavating some of the roads. And so they've actually started putting up some of the columns that are along the roads. And I thought, it's great that we have that now, because it really does give you the sense of this is a place that lots of people pass through. This is a place of commerce, a place of trade. So that's very important to remember. We're going to talk about that in a minute. It's also a place, like all of the cities, that was religious. They are all religious. I mean, there's nobody who is a-religious back then. And of course, they believed in a pantheon of gods, as you see reflected in many of the coins. We're always going back and looking at the coins. So here are a couple of examples of the coins from Thyatira. Here you get two people who are considered sons of Zeus, right? Sons of God. You've got, the emperor. So this guy right here represents the emperor, shaking hands with the local. Everybody had a favorite deity in these different cities, right? We've talked about that a lot. And if you remember Ephesus, do you remember who it was? Artemis, right? We talked about that a lot. Everybody's got a favorite deity in the cities. And here it was Apollo. So the sun god, Apollo Tyremnos is what he was known as. So this is him right here. And then in this other coin, similar sort of scene, you've got the emperor riding in on a horse. This lady here is actually the city of Thyatira, symbolized by the lady holding the god Apollo to greet the emperor. So again, you've got both of these sons of gods depicted on the coin. So very religious, although unlike the other three cities that we've already talked about, not a Neokoros. And remember that fancy title, Neokoros, just means they were the temple keepers. So they were the big cities, kind of like our big cities that win the Olympics. They had won the honor of being the host to a temple built for an emperor, right? So while they didn't have the honor of being a Neokoros, they didn't have a temple built for an emperor there. They still were very pro-Roman and pro-emperors and pro-religious. So they definitely had other temples to other gods, just not one to the emperor in the city. And again, what they had going on for them was open, flat center of commerce. They had probably more trade guilds than any of the other cities that we know about in Asia Minor. And that's also reflected on many of their coins. So here, very interesting coin. This is the god Hephaestus. Remember the bronze worker, the bronze god? And he is apparently fixing a helmet for, you remember this lady? We just talked about her last week, Athena, the goddess of war, also the goddess of wisdom. Remember, she's got the big library over in Pergamum. So anyway, he's apparently fixing a helmet for her because he was a bronze worker and could do that. And it makes total sense that they would put him on one of their coins, because this city is known for all the trade guilds, and one of them being the bronzesmiths. It's going to be important later on in the letter. But we also know from antiquity that they had guilds for bakers, for linen weavers, for tanners and leather workers, for wool workers, dyers and fullers and potters, and even slave dealers. So basically, if you had a profession, there was a guild that you could be a part of. And I mean, we have those same things today. I have one of my dear friends who works for the Association of Realtors, so it's an association for realtors. There are associations for doctors, for dentists, there are even associations of associations. Did you know that? Because my buddy goes to these big conferences for all the people who run associations. So it's kind of like that back in Thyatira. They've got tons of trade guilds, lots of prosperity, a very rich, wealthy city, okay? So keep all those things in mind because, and here is what I hope will really stick in your head and help you remember Thyatira, and you may already think of it. Do you remember anybody who's from Thyatira that we already know about in the Bible? Pop quiz for you here. I'm going to let you guys press the space bar and tell me, can anybody think of anybody else in scripture from Thyatira? It's like Bible quizzing, isn't it? Now look at Susanna's face. She's like, I don't know. No. Oh, there's a chat. Maybe somebody put in the chat. Lydia. Yes. Thank you so much. Kudos. That is awesome. Lydia is from Thyatira. So if you remember this famous lady, she shows up in Acts 16 during Paul's second missionary journey. So if you remember, he's just crossed what we know as Asia Minor, and then of course the Roman province of Asia, two different things, but Asia is in Asia Minor, very confusing. And he had set sail over here to the first place that he visits in Europe, right? He goes and he lands at Neapolis, he walks into Philippi, and there, who does he meet on a Sunday when he's out looking for any, he couldn't find a synagogue, and he finds some Jews are meeting out by the river, and it's a bunch of ladies, Lydia and a bunch of ladies. Now, Lydia, we are told, is a tradeswoman in what?
Cloth, purple cloth.
Purple cloth. Okay, excellent. So she is a great example of ancient globalization at work because she is from this city of Thyatira, right here. You can see it here. But she's living all the way over in Philippi. Likely, she was probably a representative for one of these trade guilds, right? Maybe it was for the Dyers Association or the Woolen Association, or I don't know who she was for. But we do know that she sold purple cloth, which my friends here, her being a merchant in purple cloth, that's a picture over there, was a luxury good. So let's talk about ancient globalization and luxury goods. It was called Tyrian purple sometimes. It was called royal purple. Technically, there are several different shades of it, and it often was more red than purple. I actually brought back a cloth that I picked up in Philippi in honor of Lydia, and it is red, very, very red. And here's fun facts for you. The way that they made this dye was through sea snails, and they would have to take over, I think it was something like 12,000 sea snails just to make almost 1 gram of this dye. Like that's how many they had to get. And it's the secretion that the sea snails make. So as you can imagine, it would take a really long time to get any of this dye. And that 1 gram would basically just dye the fringe of somebody's cloak. It's not a lot. So when I say luxury good, I mean like the ultimate luxury good, because it eventually became banned that only the people who could wear the purple were the royals. And so here's an example of the Byzantine Emperor Justinian I, this is later on, clad in his Tyrrhenian purple. And that's from, Susanna will like that. That's from Ravenna in Italy. So beautiful, beautiful mosaics over there. And to be born into the royal family, I mean, this color was so associated with royals, they were said to be born in the purple, into the purple. And that was a name for many of the royals back then. So Lydia probably was making some bank, as we say. And the people in Thyatira clearly were making some money because they had some luxury goods. This is just a fun picture from the very first time I ever went to visit Thyatira. This is when I was in seminary eons ago. And this is one of my good friends, Katie, in seminary. And you see, we're both wearing our scarves of different versions of Tyrian purple in honor of the Lady Lydia and her hometown. So we thought we would take a picture there for her. And where we're standing is actually in this building. So if you were to go to Thyatira today, you would see this here. It's one of the few buildings. It's a basilica. We don't think it was a Christian basilica first, probably just a civic basilica. I don't know that it ever functioned as a church, but civic basilicas, of course, these big halls, they did all sorts of things. You could have legal meetings there. I don't know if there were ever any banquets here, but for the sake of remembering this letter, let's just pretend that they would even hold some civic banquets there. Again, I got to study up on basilicas and everything that happened in them. So perhaps a civic banquet would take place there. We know that they took place in some of the guild trade halls. You know, all of these associations, they get together, they have meetings for business, but they also basically are having parties. And they're not just secular. They didn't have this distinct divide between secular and sacred. They would give incense to the emperor. You know, they would honor the emperor as a god. They would perhaps have prayers said to deities. So if you were to be a part of one of these trade guilds and associations and go to a banquet in one of those guild halls, you would have to participate in the local religion as well. And not to participate in it meant that you were probably blackballed from the association. And how do you get business? By being a part of the association, right? Now, another place we know that they held banquets, and this we know for sure, is they would have them in some of their private dining halls. I've shown you some pictures of some of the houses that they had at Ephesus. Amazing. This is a reconstruction of a banquet hall known as a triclinium. You hear that tri meaning three. So it's like a three-sided table, boom, boom, boom. And they would always lay on their sides and they would eat on their side. This is actually one that was from Ostia in Rome, but they were all over the empire. Here is one. And I'm wishing Duke could see it right now. He's over on the other side, so he never gets to see the pictures, but he's listening. This is from our last trip to Turkey when we got to go visit Antioch. Remember the place where they're first called Christians? It's today called Antakya, Turkey. And this is the first time we'd ever gotten to go there because it's just a few miles from the Syrian border. So we haven't been able to go there for years, but we got to go this time. And it was super cool because one of the things that they have unearthed is this banquet hall. And you can see the pattern of the triclinium. You can see exactly where they would have put the tables, not nearly as fancy right here, these three sides. But as you're lying down on these couches to eat, you could see this amazing mosaic of the winged horse Pegasus. It's just beautiful, a spectacular work of art. And here is where they would enter the hall and come in this way. And of course, they'd be greeted by these beautiful mosaics, the luxury that this person has. I mean, this is a rich person's home, right? So if they were wealthy enough in Thyatira, maybe they were having some of their banquets in these homes. This is kind of a reconstruction of the colors and what it would have looked like, just how bright and vibrant. I mean, these patterns would have been on the floor. So just imagine the cost of having people design and construct this for you. So they're partying, and as a Christian, you might not appreciate everything that they're doing. It's not just the fact that they would have been offering sacrifices either to the emperor or to other gods. It's also the fact that you've probably heard of these Greek symposiums, if you've heard of that before. Well, sometimes they're more like drinking clubs for men. Lots of ladies would come and do interesting things for them. The sexual nature of them was tied into the food. So they're eating, they're drinking, they're doing other stuff. So there are many things that would have offended a Christian and might, entice them to leave perhaps. But, if you get up and you walk out on something like that, you're probably going to be blackballed from society, right? You've just offended all of your neighbors. You've just offended everybody in your association. So what happens to your ability to earn money anymore? So clearly the Christians who are living in this kind of society, and Lydia would have been one of these people, right? We think she was probably part of this association as a dealer in that luxury good. I mean, you have these choices, like, do you participate? Do you compromise some of your beliefs? Or do you get blackballed from your association? So that's just a little bit of the background of what's going on over in Thyatira. So when we get to the letter itself, and if you want to open it, Revelation 2:18 through 29, I'll have it all up on the screen too, or you can use a little booklet that I gave you if you've got that. Hopefully that's helping you take some notes if you're a note taker. When we look at any of these letters, remember, we've divided it up into the different sections. Like any good letter, you get an introduction, you get a body, and you get a conclusion. And we've even divided it up further into our different C's. So we get a couple of C's in each section. So the first, in the introduction, we always are told the church that is being written to. So in this one, it is to the angel of the church in Thyatira. So we get the name, right? And then we get the Christ title. So all of those are being drawn, remember, from chapter 1 in Revelation, that opening apocalyptic vision. And so some part of the description has to do with how Jesus was depicted in chapter 1. So we've got the recipient, the church in Thyatira, and we've got the sender, Christ. And we are told that he is, the words come from the person who is the Son of God. Actually, this is the only place in Revelation where Son of God appears, the title here, whose eyes are like a fiery flame and whose feet are like fine brass. Okay. Now you can probably already guess, why is this the part that is picked out from chapter 1 and used for the city of Thyatira? Why do you guys think? Any ideas?
I mean, like the brass?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, because brass workers were there.
Yeah, absolutely. We think
The
there's
symbol-
always,
Yeah,
yes.
symbol of the tradespersons.
Perfect. Yes. So we think it has a lot to do with that. The Son of God, of course, as I said, the only place that it's showing up in Revelation, could be referring to even some of these coins that you see and the people that the city worshiped as sons of God or sons of Zeus, whether they are the emperors, whether they are the divine sons of Zeus, like Apollo. So it could be a reference here to a city, like all of the other cities, honestly, that's compromising their faith by worshiping other sons of God. But what Kathleen was saying, with the eyes like blazing fire and with the feet like bronze from a glowing furnace, I mean, it does sound a lot like a city that's known for its trade guilds, especially for its bronzesmiths, because they're even putting the god of smiths on their coin, right? So it's interesting that he chooses these images for a city that is known for their bronze working. I've showed you some of the different artistic renderings of chapter 1. I like this one. I mean, he's looking really tough. You know, it's almost like, Seleucus the First Nicator again. He's somebody who's really strong and powerful, and his whole body looks like bronze, but you can see they're really highlighting the bronze feet here and the eyes that have these, flames of fire shooting out of them. So I think in many ways it's comparing, it's a bad way to put it, but for lack of a better term, almost like the ultimate superhero, the ultimate god in comparison with who everybody else thinks is a god, the emperor, Apollo, Hephaestus, any of these other gods. They don't hold a candle to the one who's got eyes like glowing fire and feet like burnished bronze, right? I think it's a pretty neat idea. Of course, this is also a reference to the Old Testament. So if we go back to the book of Daniel, and we talk about, well, you've heard of feet of clay. Jesus doesn't have feet of clay. He has feet of burnished bronze. So he is the one who is able to walk on anything, who his feet are not going to fall apart like clay feet would. He's able to go anywhere. He's able to see. He has piercing vision that pierces into anything, right? So a lot of this is a reference to that vision in Daniel, but also I think it's a reference to judgment. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit, because remember, all of these opening visions and the descriptions of Christ are usually tied to the consequences that we're told about, that the people in Thyatira are going to suffer, right, if they don't shape up. So as we move on, go ahead. Yeah.
A question. I'm sure you've covered this and I've forgotten, but these letters don't appear to actually be to the church in Thyatira, but to the angel of the church.
Right.
So tell me about that again. Why is...
Yes. So it's a good question. In that opening vision, we are told that Jesus holds the 7 stars in his hand, and the stars are connected with the angels of each of the churches, if you remember that. But the word Angelos in Greek also means messenger. So there is a whole debate, like, is this really talking about like angelic angels that watch over each of the cities, and each city church has their own angel? Or is it talking about a representative, a messenger that is going to each of the cities and taking this message, right? That is being sent from God. So angels, messengers from God. The word in Greek could be translated either way. So it could be.
Where do you go on this?
Oh, sometimes I just like to be open to all the possibilities. That's the thing about symbols. They are, they have many layers. They can mean many different things.
Sure.
I can tell you what it could have meant to them back then. I don't know specifically how they would have taken it, but yeah, I don't know. Could be either one. I don't know.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, so we've got Jesus, who is all superhero-y like here. And then we've got the body of the letter. And remember, I told you this is the longest letter of the 7. I promise. I will try not to take very long on it. I know you guys have other things to do today, but we will do it thoroughly and completely as well. So the body of the letter always breaks down into 2 bits. And so the first bit, we get compliments and or complaints. Remember, some cities are lucky enough that they don't get any complaints. We've only seen one so far, and that was the lucky ducks in Smyrna. Good. Yeah. And then some cities, all they get, are complaints. So Smyrna got compliments, no complaints. Some cities get only complaints, and some get a mixture of both. And they always start out with, I know. So let's talk about first the compliments, because we get both in this letter. So it's interesting too, because I think it speaks to the different factions that are in the churches. So there's often compliments to the ones who are doing right, and of course complaints about the ones who aren't. And so there's a lot of division between these churches. So first we get compliments. I know your works, your love and faithfulness, your service and endurance. I also know that the works you have done most recently are even greater than those you did at first. This sounds a lot like Paul's letter to the Thessalonians, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. Your labor of love. I can't quote it. I used to be able to quote it long ago, but my brain doesn't work like it used to be. Your faith, your labor, your works. Anyway, it's almost like a Pauline triad, except there are 4 things. So we are told here that their works are even greater than at first. And that's wonderful. That's great, because we're told over in Ephesus that they are not. They've fallen from the high place that they started at. And so they need to remember what they did at first and redo it. So whereas they had lost their first love in Ephesus, here, this is actually the first church that we're told is known for loving. So that's great. First of any of the churches that they're commended for their love. They're also commended for their faithfulness. And I think I've told you before that in Revelation, faith, that pistos in Greek, always, always, always means faithfulness, like loyalty. It doesn't mean belief. It never means belief in Revelation, which is pretty striking. It's always about being faithful, being loyal, as they were in Smyrna, even to the point of death, right? Service. So we know that they're doing some kind of service, and we know that they're enduring. So we know that there was at least some good element of the church that was holding on, being faithful, loving one another, serving, and obviously enduring for being faithful, because you couldn't have it both ways there. Then we jump into the complaints. And so you guys are going to forgive me, but sometimes in the middle of a long lecture and a long letter, it helps to have a comedic break. And so I thought I would bring this short little video, because this is what I always hear in my head when it says, I know what you've been doing, and I'm going to give you a naughty list. It always reminds me of this satirical video. Have you guys seen it before? Let's see. This is what it reminds me of.
Well, all right. Now it's time for me to tell you all what you've done wrong since I last saw you. And don't try and hide, because I'm Jesus. I will find you. Let's start with you, Peter. You lied to your mother the other day. Andrew, you said a naughty word when you hit your finger with the hammer. James, you laughed at him when he hit his finger. Moving right along, John, you drank too much wine the other night. Not way too much, just enough to make me angry. Matthew, we fell asleep in church, didn't we? Yes, we did. And Thomas, you were slow dancing a little too close with that girlfriend of yours. Let's see. And you, I forgot your name, so you're off the hook for now. Hmm. Philip, I saw you smoking a cigarette behind that big rock the other day. Thaddeus, I hate to say I saw you stick up your middle finger at someone who cut you off when you were riding your camel. Benjamin, you aren't wearing your WWJD bracelet. Jacob, I don't mind you saying my name, but not after you stub your toe. And Frank, you know what you did. I just can't repeat it because I'm Jesus. All right, all you sinners, come with me.
All right, so poor Frank. We don't even know what Frank did. And hopefully you won't think that was terribly irreligious of me, but that's what I always think about when you get this long litany of, I know what you did. It's this satirical version, which, we don't think Jesus is actually like that. And that's what makes it so funny, of course. But it feels that way sometimes when you're going through these 7 letters, because there are a lot of complaints, especially this one, where here we go. This is what he knows about them. But I have this against you. You put up with that woman, Jezebel, who calls herself a prophet. You allow her to teach and to mislead my servants into committing sexual immorality and eating food sacrificed to idols. I gave her time to change her heart and life, but she refuses to change her life of prostitution. Whew, it's a lot, right? Now, of course, there have been people over the ages who take that as, well, any woman who wants to be a prophet and preach, must be a Jezebel, right? Somebody who is going to just teach you and mislead you. But of course, that's not true. I had a professor in seminary, side note, who, when we were taking Greek, he put us into 7 different cities of Revelation, and each team had a city's name. And he always put an all-female group in Thyatira. Why? Because it's the place where Jezebel dwells. And he thought that was hilarious. So we were always stuck in all-female groups. So I was in Thyatira. Well, one day I said, who else is from Thyatira? It's Lydia. Lydia's not a Jezebel. Lydia's a good person, right? And he's like, well, great. When I see you walking down the hall with a bolt of purple cloth, I'll start calling you Lydia instead of Jezebel. So funny, not funny. That was seminary. He was trying to be funny. So not everybody was Jezebel from there. There were also Lydia. But did you know, and this is really sad, there is this whole, I don't even know where it came from, but for a while there were some pastors who had hypothesized that maybe Lydia came back and maybe the pressure on her to accommodate was just so much that maybe Lydia is the Jezebel referred to here. That's just slander on poor Lydia. We don't have any reason to believe that, of course, but somehow, the poor women always get tied together. So it's just like Mary Magdalene, right? Was she a prostitute? No, it doesn't say that anywhere, but she always gets tied together with some of the other women. I don't know. It's a whole thing. So anyway, we know though that there was someone. We don't know that her literal name was Jezebel. I'm going to go with not, since so many things are symbolic in Revelation. And we are told that she is both a prophet and a prostitute, okay? Which is really interesting and maybe tells us something about what was going on there. Now, there were female prophets, both in antiquity in general, in temples, and in Judaism in particular. We know of at least 7 female prophets in the Old Testament. You could probably think of some of them off the top of your head, Miriam being one of the most famous ones, of course. But yeah, there were female prophets. And of course, there were females. If you remember, like a year or so ago, I taught the course here that was about St. Paul and all the leading ladies. And we talked about all of the things that women did in the New Testament and how there were female prophets in the New Testament as well. So we talked about some of those that are listed there. So there were prophets, both in other religions and in Judaism and in Christianity. So totally plausible. But she's also called a prostitute, which isn't a great thing. And why is she called that? Well, we think it goes back to Old Testament Jezebel. And if you remember, Old Testament Jezebel was this Phoenician princess that marries the king of Israel, and of course leads everybody astray, because this is a constant thing that comes up. It came up in last week's letter to Pergamum. Remember when we were talking about Balak and Balaam, and there's a reference to them and how Balaam had talked to the foreign ladies and to come into the Israelite camp, and they all led the Israelite men astray. You remember that story too? So there's always this idea of, if you hang out with the foreign ladies, they're going to lead you astray and they are going to cause you to sin. How? Well, in the Old Testament especially, this idea of idolatry, so worshiping other gods other than Yahweh, worshiping idols, is the same thing as adultery, idolatry, adultery, right? Because you're basically cheating on God. So I think, and that's one of the reasons why she's called a prostitute, because she's leading people astray to worship somebody other than God. So you see those two things going together. So the loose foreign women will come in, lead you astray sexually, which also leads you astray religiously to worship other people. So she's referred to as a Jezebel, which is not a good thing. And we remember that Jezebel supported like all of these foreign priests, Asherah, Bel, you remember that? And the end of poor Jezebel, she gets thrown out of a window and is eaten by dogs. If you kind of remember that story, it's kind of a gruesome ending, what happens to the lady. But yeah, she's one of those. Did you ever see that book, Bad Girls, the Bible? Pretty sure she's in that book. So some people think, well, was this Jezebel, real name, fictitious name, an actual prostitute? Was she perhaps someone that had been a prostitute, then became a Christian? Or was she simply a leader in the church who also was totally willing to go to some of these banquets where there were prostitutes and where immoral things went on? So you remember last week, we talked a little bit about the banquets, and I said, hold on, we're going to talk about them way more next week. This is a vase, Greek red figure vase, that is depicting what happened in some of these Greek symposiums. And so you can kind of see there's a lot of music, there's a lot of wine, there's a lot of dancing ladies and prostitutes. So there's a lot of immoral things that happened at these banquets. So I think the best guess of what it's saying is the Jezebel was the leader of a group of Christians, kind of like the Nicolaitans that we've heard about already in Ephesus and also in Pergamum. The Balaamites, they're all these names. Were they literal names or were they just figurative names? Probably more figurative most of the time. And so there's always this group of Christians who are led by Balaam, Nicholas, Jezebel, who were saying it's okay to accommodate with prevailing culture. Like, we need to be able to do that. And clearly, John was not of that opinion. We talked a little bit last week about some of the differences that you find in some of Paul's writings versus John's writings. I mean, Paul seemed to be all things to all people. I mean, even when you're talking about this issue of eating food that is sacrificed to idols, and that's the only way you get meat in antiquity, is their sacrifices at the temple, and what gets left over with the meat, that's what's given out to the people. So to be able to avoid like any meat sacrifice to an idol meant that you're pretty much going to be a vegetarian probably. And Paul seems to think, well, these idols, these other gods aren't anything. It's fine as long as it doesn't offend your brother. So clearly he wasn't hanging out with John, because if he'd been hanging out with John at that time, nobody would have been eating it, because John thinks partaking in it is partaking in worship of an idol, of worship of another god, right? So he's a hard no on this practice and does not think it's a good idea. So the complaint, he says, people following this Jezebel, she's teaching and misleading others to do two things: commit sexual immorality and eat food sacrificed to idols. And again, we think both of these things are going on in some of these trade guild banquets. So it's entirely possible that's what's happening. Would make complete sense with this city known for trade guilds and prosperity and luxury goods. So I like to think of it as the two big sins that they're committing. And we talked about these last week in Pergamum. It makes sense. The city that is the gateway for Pergamum, it's kind of twin city, its protector, same problems as Pergamum. And one of those is, let's call it being in bed with the enemy, right? So committing some type of sexual immorality. and then eating the forbidden fruit, if you want to think about it that way. And my best guess, and the best guess of many scholars, is it was accommodating to the culture and participating in some of these symposiums, banquets. Oh, I see the notes. So that's what a symposium is. I'm not getting my money's worth in all the Zoom WebEx stuff I'm having to attend these days. All right. I don't know which Zoom WebEx stuff you're attending, but I would be interested to hear about it later. So yeah, Greek symposiums, I mean, they would get together, and I mean, Susanna could probably tell us more about what's going on there, you know, the philosophy. And you want to tell us anything about what's going on? No? Okay, she's saying no, she doesn't. But yes, so they would have music, they would have art, but then they also had wine and food, and, you know, it gets out of hand.
Just one thing, the women, the good women, the women that were the, you know, the wives, they were never invited to these things, but the heterae, which was their names for they were prostitutes sometimes, but they were more like geisha, you know, they were smart.
Yeah.
So they were brought in because they could converse intelligently with the people at the symposium.
Yeah. Excellent.
So anything else they did was something else.
Well, I mean, I think the connection here with today, and this is again what we're studying these things, right? It's not just interesting historical happenings. We think that it has something to say to our lives today that we can learn from the past, right? I think the real question is, and maybe this is just because I'm a Rotarian, Yolanda, they were asking how we knew each other before. And I said, we're in Rotary Club together. And in Rotary, you know, part of the whole reason it began was they were trying to get businessmen, it was all men back then, to be ethical. You know, they developed this 4-way test. You're supposed to think, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill, better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? Because there is always this temptation in business to cut corners, or perhaps to, you know, make business deals in unsavory places, or be willing to bribes. I mean, it doesn't even have to go into bribes. I mean, all the time I think about in setting up, you know, these pilgrimages and these travel programs, like there are corners that always have to think like, can I cut that one? I mean, do you pay somebody less than the prevailing wage because that's the only way that you're going to be able to make it and make a profit and keep the business open? Do you actually pay for carbon sequestration for all that carbon that the plane is giving off? I mean, it's not exactly the same thing as these banquets, but I think there's always a temptation in any profession, but I'm talking here specifically about business, to accommodate. You know, there's always some way that you can accommodate and not be the best Christian, perhaps not hold to your Christian values and ethics. And this is the way that they were being tempted to accommodate back then, because if you wanted to be a part of that association, you're going to have to go to meetings like this. You're going to have to sacrifice to the emperor. You're going to have to eat meat that was sacrificed to idols in the temple, right? This is where it's all coming from. You're going to be a part of a Greek symposium banquet where, yeah, you are participating in things that you would not like to tell your wife about back home. Let's just put it that way. So business people today, I mean, what do you have to do to get the business, to stay in business, to, you know, I mean, there's always some way that we are called to compromise. And so I think that that is one of the biggest messages to the church in Thyatira. How are they compromising to culture? And here's something interesting, I think, because sometimes we think, gosh, this is such a harsh message, but there is this little gem in here where he says, I gave her time to change. That's that metanoia, change, repent, turn, change her heart and life, but she refuses to change her life of prostitution. So she had been given a chance, right? It's not like he's like, you did it wrong and boom, it's over. No, there is this, I gave you time. I've asked you to repent. So now we're going to get the consequences, right? So we're going to hear the warnings. If you keep following this lady, this prophet / prostitute, here's what's going to happen. So he says, look, I'm throwing her onto a sickbed. I am casting those who have committed adultery with her into terrible hardship. If they don't change, and again, there is the opportunity to change, the invitation to do things different. If they don't change their hearts from following her practices, and I will even put her children to death with disease, which sounds awful, but here we do think the children is, it is more symbolic, talking about followers of this lady, not actual, children. I will put her children to death with disease. Then all the churches will know that I'm the one who examines minds and hearts, and that I will give to each of you what your actions deserve. It's a pretty harsh warning, right? And it's interesting because she's called Jezebel. And if you remember, Jezebel's end was being thrown out the window, right? Here they're being thrown onto the instrument of sin, sick bed. We think could be a reference to these couches in the Triclinium. So there is a lot of sickness taking place on these beds, right? Well, I'm going to throw you on the sick bed. You're going to get what your actions deserve if you don't change. So very harsh warning that happens here, but it also comes with a promise. And remember, I said divided congregation here. As for the rest of you in Thyatira, those of you who don't follow this teaching and haven't learned the so-called deep secrets of Satan, I won't burden you with anything else. Just hold on to what you have until I come. Okay. Now, what are these deep secrets of Satan? Well, again, we talked about some of the other churches. It sounds a lot like some kind of proto-Gnosticism. So maybe not full-blown Gnosticism, but some kind of Gnostic teaching. And remember, they are the ones who claim to know. That's what Gnostic means, gnosis. They know the real, legit teachings of Jesus. They have this secret, deep knowledge. And so some people think it's a play on that. Like, you claim to have deep knowledge, really the deep teaching that you know are the deep secrets of Satan, right? That's so they turn it on its head. You claim to be all smart and knowing. What you know is not good. And here's a hypothetical reconstruction. Just one scholar had said maybe it's something like this. Alan Johnson says, the only effective way to confront Satan was to enter into his strongholds. The real nature of sin could only be learned by experience, and therefore only those who had really experienced sin could truly appreciate grace. So by experiencing the depths of paganism, the deep secrets of Satan, one would better be equipped to serve Christ or be an example of freedom to his brothers. Martin Luther often gets quoted for that sin and sin boldly sort of thing, which is taking it a bit out of context, but that idea that you've got to sin boldly to really experience grace, right? You got to go deep into the sin, deep into the paganism. And if you're Gnostic, if you think that there is this complete dualism between, the soul or spirit and the flesh, then it doesn't matter what you do with the flesh, right? So maybe even participating in all these fleshly things would better bolster your spirit, because now you can really appreciate grace and now you can really help others. So we don't know exactly what it was, but this is just one hypothetical reconstruction of the logic of maybe Jezebel and the other people. I mean, it's so easy to spin things and to twist words. And I mean, we see that happen all the time, right? Things being twisted. Now, going back to the good group, if you will, as for the rest of you in Thyatira, those of you who don't follow this teaching and haven't learned these so-called deep secrets of Satan, I won't burden you with anything else. Just hold on to what you have until I come. And I love that, because it reminds us that, sometimes that's all that is required. Sometimes, I don't know if you're like me, you beat yourself up that you're not doing enough. And sometimes there are moments in your life where you're not asked to be doing so much. You're just asked to hold on and survive. And that is a word of comfort to me. So it's nice to know that these people who are already struggling with so much, you're doing enough. It's okay. Just hold on. And just to help you remember it, and because it's a long lecture and sometimes it helps, it reminds me of the 90s with Wilson Phillips. Do you remember this? That's what I always say. So anyway, for the city that has Jezebel and all the ladies in it, you can remember Wilson Phillips and their advice of just holding on for one more day. So that's all the Christians had to do. So maybe it'll be stuck in your head. That's what I always think. Okay. And then until I come, which is the good news, is that Jesus is coming, which again, it's so prophetic, right? Prophecy is always meant to, challenge those who are doing wrong, and it's supposed to comfort those who are doing what is right. And so in this instant, Jesus coming is a comfort. They only have to hold on till then. It's a challenge for those who are going to be in trouble when he shows up, right? And we've talked about this before, how there are always these connections between the Christ vision at the first and the consequences. And so just as a reminder of the other cities, remember in Ephesus, we knew there were issues of hospitality and love. So what do they highlight about Jesus? He's the one who's holding them in his hand, who walks among them. So it's this image of presence, because they are told to return to their first love. And again, I think that has more to do with how they're loving each other, because they're super good at discerning heresy, right? So they don't have a problem with compromising with heresy. They do have a problem with loving each other and hospitality that we know about from the Johannine letters too. So they are threatened with lampstand being removed. Their churches. Your church won't exist if you keep backbiting and can't love each other and can't even be hospitable to one another, right? Smyrna, they're the ones that are good, no complaints, but they're being persecuted. They're even facing death. So of course, what's highlighted in the opening of that letter is Jesus as the first and the last, the one who has come back from death. All they've got to do is be faithful. And yes, it may be faithful unto death, remember, but they are promised that crown of life. So, I mean, all these letters are just appropriately tailored to what is going on in each church, and they're all unique and different. Pergamum, compromise, right? They are same thing as Thyatira here, eating the forbidden fruit, being in bed with the enemy. So the consequences, they're told, repent. And if you don't repent, Jesus, remember in the vision, he's the one who's got the double-edged sword coming out of his mouth, which was the image of the ruler, the person who had the authority to judge. I'm going to make war with you with the sword in my mouth. Basically, I'm coming to judge you, which I put it again here because they're so similar. These two letters in particular, right in the middle, because they both have to deal with compromise. And here we get this image of, I mean, it's, hard superhero Jesus with blazing eyes of fire and with the, feet of bronze. He can walk anywhere. He can't see anything. It's almost like Superman. He had that X-ray vision sort of thing. He can penetrate to anybody's hearts. And we're told later on, he examines their minds and hearts and he gives them what they deserve, is what we're told. So again, this image of judgment, they're going to get what their actions deserve, is what we are told in this consequence. And then finally, we get to the end, the conclusion. And remember, the conclusion always has conquering promise and a call to hear. Now, in the first three letters, the call to hear comes first. So this is a reversed order for the last four churches. I don't know why. I have no idea why he decided to reverse them, but he does. So we're going to get the conquering promise first. Then we end with the call to hear, which is always Israel's biggest problem. Remember, it's like the biggest thing that we're told in the Old Testament is listen, hear. And so here we go. I like my these little bookmarks that I brought back from Turkey because they summarize it very nicely. So the conquering promise: to those who emerge victorious, victory, Nike, right? You who are the real Nicators, not just Seleucus the First, keeping my practices until the end, I will give authority over the nations to rule the nations with an iron rod and smash them like pottery. Just as I received authority from my Father, I will also give them the morning star. If you can hear, listen to what the Spirit is saying to the churches. Now, a lot of the imagery in Revelation is really harsh and really hard for us to deal with today. We don't like hearing, Jesus talk like that. That doesn't sound nice, right? Well, there are a few mitigating factors here. One, when we are told that you will be given the authority to rule over nations, that word for rule that's used in Greek is, well, it's a shepherd rule. It's priest, our shepherds, right? This is in part pastor, where it comes from. That word pastor is a shepherding image. And so actually that word for rule in Greek is more this image of a shepherd over their sheep. So that mitigates this a little bit. It's still pretty harsh though, because we're told that they are shepherding, ruling over the nations, not just with bronze like they have in Thyatira, but with iron, which is even harder than bronze, right? So there's an iron rod, but still the rod is a shepherding rod. So I don't know if that makes you feel any better or not, but it is this image of a very firm shepherd and rod. And then of course there is that pottery image, and all of this is coming out of Psalm 2. If you want to go read it later on, it's a messianic psalm. And so it makes reference to this iron rod and smashing things of pottery. And that's what's going to happen when the Messiah comes. So it's very much a messianic reference that we get here. When the Messiah shows up, he judges. And then finally, we got the gift of the morning star, which I won't even go into all the different things people have said that could mean. Let's just go with what it does mean later on in Revelation, because in Revelation 22, we're told Jesus is the bright morning star, right? It is I, Jesus, who sent my angel to you with this testimony for the churches. I am the root and the descendant of David, the bright and morning star. So frankly, I think for the good part, I guess, of Thyatira, they are promised the gift of the bright and morning star, which kind of goes with this whole image of fire. You know, he's the one who's got the flames of fire and just brilliance. Not Apollo, the sun god, Jesus, the bright and morning star. Like that's who they're going to get, the much better person that you want to have for eternity. So it's kind of a promise of presence again, I think.
Question, if I may.
Yeah. So that's it in a nutshell. You guys got any questions?
Yes, question. Michael here. On bright and morning star, I know that and I don't remember if it's the word morning or if it's the word star, but they're different in chapter 2 than they are in chapter 22. And so that's why I've heard this interpretation before, but I was just curious with the difference in the Greek words, why that would be.
Yeah, okay. Well, all right, this may take a little bit longer, but in a nutshell, I think illusions don't always have to have the exact same word to be an illusion. When I was doing my dissertation, it was actually on, a lot of it was on the temptation account in Matthew's gospel, especially. And, you know, there's a lot of imagery there as well. And so some people discount some of the illusions there because they're like, well, it's not the exact same word. But I don't think that that's how illusions always work. It doesn't have to be the exact same word to be an illusion to something else. So that would be my very short answer to you. I don't think they have to be the same thing to be alluding to the same thing, but it's also possible that it does mean something else. I mean, some people think it's an allusion to Venus being the morning star, and so Jesus being much greater and stronger than Venus. Some people think, again, it is a counter allusion to Apollo, who is the sun god. There's like 6 or 7 different things that people have suggested, but for my money, I would probably say, I don't think it has to be the exact same Greek word to be an allusion to the same thing, but that's my take for you.
All right, thank you.
Yep. Anything else?
Well, I love the ruling with an iron rod. You know, there are times a shepherd has to be pretty fierce.
Huh?
You know, you can't be nicey to everybody. You know, if you're a shepherd, you've got a job to do to protect the sheep, especially the young, vulnerable ones or a pregnant one. Or, I mean, this is a real job. It's, you know, there are wolves, you know, and there are wolves in sheep's clothing, and, you know, all of this stuff. I mean, there are discernment and calling a spade a spade. Sometimes you just got to call it out. I'm not put off by that strong iron rod or the concept of rule. You know, as shepherd, I mean, there's ways to behave as a shepherd, and you do it for the sake of the others, as you say about Rotary. You know, you care what effect, what environment am I am I trying to create or protect? You know, where will people thrive in the church? Mm-hmm.
I'm not a parent, and I'm really glad that I'm not, because I can't imagine trying to raise kids right now. And I mean, just with the internet, like that alone makes parenting different. All the things that are out there, all the ways that kids can be exploited. But yeah, I mean, just in watching our friends raise kids and my, brothers raise their kids, I just think, wow, I mean, you know that they're going to rebel sometimes, but if you don't, have hard and fast guidelines for them, there's so much that can happen to them. There's so many ways that they can be distracted or misled by somebody who's like, this is okay. It's okay if you accommodate or do this or that or participate in whatever. I have some specific things I'm thinking about, but I won't go into them. But yeah, I think it's so hard, but it's similar to that, isn't it? So he even alludes to followers of Jezebel as children. So in many ways, it is kind of like raising kids and trying to teach them when it's okay to accommodate and when it's not, because you don't want them to think that culture is awful, but there are some really dangerous things out there too. So anyway, and now I'm just blethering on, so I'll stop. Any other questions you guys have?
This was wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for bringing us to the scripture.
Thank you guys for coming. It's great to see all of you.
Mhm.
Yeah, this was great, Meg.
We just have 3 more to go. That's it. So yeah.
I have just a quick general question.
Yeah.
Is there a place that we can go to see the links for some of the past sessions that we may have missed?
This is a good question. I don't have them. Does anybody know where they're being stored? I haven't gotten a hold of them. Maybe Father David is the one to write.
Okay, all right, thank you. I've noticed that they're being recorded and I was just curious if we could go back and watch the sessions we missed.
Maybe.
Yes, they're somewhere, but I don't have them. I think the church has them, right?
They have them somewhere, but I don't know
We'll
where.
try to have an answer for next week about where there's being kept.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, great, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks, Meg. So interesting.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks all
you.
of you. Have a good rest of your Sunday.
Bye.
Oh,
Thank
miss
you.
messages. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.